you'll be able to get that. So the topic we're going to be getting after today is early humans and the emergence of the first civilizations. No matter who you are, what nationality, ethnic background, language, family, where on the Earth's surface you're at today, you have a stake, you have an anchor in the common human story that we're going to get after today, which is how do human beings go from being hunter-gatherers to farmers, and what does that mean? How does that all link us together, that common experience? I want to begin with this, and you don't need to write this down. This is just a scaffolding device to help you make a better sense of the human story. It's been argued by some historians that all of human history, no matter where you fall, falls into three simple categories. One of them is called the hunter-gatherer era, another is called the agrarian era, and another is called the industrial era. We, all of us, had the fortune to be born well in the industrial era. When I was a 3-year-old, I had strep throat and I was prescribed antibiotics, and I very likely survived childhood. Roll those dice again 300 years ago, maybe not so lucky. I also grew up in air conditioning homes for the most part. Had electricity, I flip switch, stuff happens, flush toilets, microwaves, all of these comforts of modern life, but none of it is happening unless we have fossil fuels, which allow us to unlock an incredible amount of energy and power and create all these comforts and advancements of today's life. I'd like to step away from that, but I want you to remember that you're from the industrial era. But the vast majority of humans who ever lived, they didn't have that luxury. They didn't have that lottery of birth fortune. Most people, throughout most of the human experience, were born in the hunter-gatherer era. It's estimated by archaeologists and anthropologists that the longest period of human history is this hunter-gatherer era. 200,000 years ago until about 10,000, maybe 8,000 years ago, it was only hunting and gathering. There's no farming, there's no domestication of livestock, there's no metal tools. That was the norm. You go by what you can pull from the forest and the fields and the animal herds. Good luck. But around 10,000 years ago, around 8,000 BCE, and we'll talk about this notation of BCE in a moment, begins a huge rupture in the human experience known as the agrarian era, where farming is possible. It happens at some spots on the Earth's surface first, but then quickly gets transmitted elsewhere. And it's estimated that this agrarian era, it lasts until about just under 300 years ago. Now, there are advancements in the meantime, and there's big things that come along. 8,000 BCE is not the same as 1750 CE or AD. But what this unlocks is more food production, things like conflict over land, surplus. You have more than you need, so now you have to guard it, and maybe the powerful people get to meter it out to their friends, and then some people get angry and they overthrow the powerful people, but then they really do the same thing. That's a good chunk of human history. Rinse, wash, and repeat that story. First civilizations emerge. That's going to be the story which we're talking about today and what that means for people and why we are using the term. Let's define it. Civilizations. A simple way to think about that term is a complex and organized society. A complex and organized society. And that can't come about until you unlock the power of agriculture and farming. And then a little under 300 years ago, it's argued that we begin this new era of the industrial era. First, things like coal get used to power things, coal and steam, and then eventually oil and gas, and that gives way to electricity and automobiles and all the complexities of modern life, the things you and I enjoy really without thinking about it. But we're going to zero in on how this second category comes about. Quick note on the abbreviations here. How many of you have just heard, and raise your hand, don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to define it. How many of you have just heard of the ways of describing time, BC and AD? Okay, yeah. It gets back to the fact that we use in the Western world the Christian calendar, or the Gregorian calendar, which is an outgrowth of before that, the Julian calendar that was used by the Romans. But it all zeroes around the Christian calendar, that is, at least in the passage of time, it zeroes around the life of the foundational figure of Christianity, which is Jesus of Nazareth, when he's believed to have lived. And that's about 2,000 plus years ago. So anything after that, the traditional Christian notation of it was Anno Domini. In Latin, that means in the year of our Lord. The academic term is the Common Era, CE. So when I say 1750 CE, I'm saying 1750 AD, just a different usage of the term. And then before that, if we go back pre-2020 years ago, we would be in the BCE time period, before the Common Era or before Christ. That makes sense. So we are living today in the year 2021 CE, the Common Era. Any questions on that? All right. So I want to start with a quick dramatic telling of how important farming was for unlocking the potential of humanity. And I want to pose this question. Why does farming change everything? More specifically, as this clip plays, it's only 3 minutes long, I'd like you to identify 2 changes that farming stimulates within society. 2 changes that it stimulates. In a moment, chat with a person or a handful of people around you. What changes did farming stimulate in society? Share out amongst yourselves, and then we will share out as a group. Okay. Hey, let's get some. Let's establish another kind of world history large group or lecture norm, which is that we should be really open to share out here. What are some changes that you saw that get stimulated by farming? What can we say? Yeah, right there.
It lets people settle down.
It lets people settle down. You stay in one place. Yeah, go ahead.
And if someone had a better spot than someone else, they would fight for it.
Yeah, fighting, conflict, warfare, violence, bloodshed, that goes up once farming gets embraced. It's just a reality of it. Land is valuable. You have vested interest in that land. You fight to the death to defend it. Yeah, go ahead.
Everyone had a job and it was more organized.
Yeah, everyone has a job or some sort of specialization, and you've anticipated a term that we'll get to. And there's more organization. Not that there's no organization to hunting and gathering, but you have more things to manage, more variables, more things happening overall. Anything else that you saw? Those were all really good things. All right. So I want to get after a term here because this is what's happening. That's what you saw. This is the academic term to describe it, the Neolithic Revolution. Definitionally, this is the shift from food gathering to food producing through farming, the domestication of animals, permanent settlements, and increasingly more complex tools that eventually give way to things like metal tools. And that's going to be a huge breakthrough. The academic term is the Neolithic Revolution. It's also commonly called the Agricultural Revolution. But if you go into world history, you realize there's several agricultural revolutions, and this is just more specific to this time period. So the Neolithic Revolution, that's what you're witnessing here. And the Neolithic Revolution, it's going to unlock all this potential for humanity. That food production, animals, and settlements begin to stimulate. And we'll get after some of those specifics, and many of you correctly anticipated what those would be. This is linked on It's Learning, so if you want to come back for this, you can. I want to draw your attention to this visual here. I've always found this to be a real telling graph, one of the best graphs in all of world history. And what it is it's world population growth throughout time. The y-axis is billions of people in the world. The x-axis is time. It's a timeline. Everything before the dotted line is the hunter-gatherer era. They call it the Old Stone Age. That's an outdated term. But it's the hunter-gatherer era. And then after the dotted line, that is the Neolithic Revolution, the agrarian era. And what's really fascinating to me is how stable this graph is. Human population doesn't hit 1 billion people, it's estimated, until the year 1800, until about just 220 years ago. Doesn't even hit 1 billion. When I was born in 1983, population was just over 5 billion. When I was in high school, we hit 6 billion. When I was about 30 years old, we hit 7 billion, and today we're just shy of 8 billion. All of this was allowed to happen because of that industrial era, the unlocking of fossil fuels and all of the advancements, particularly in medicine and so forth, that allow people to live past the age of 30. But what's telling here is even in this agrarian era, even with all of the potential of farming and animals and getting what you can from the land and societies, and people can build temples, they can make guns, they had gunpowder, ships, empires, all of that's happening, but population isn't really moving that much. Here's a group question for you to think about here. I'd like you to just talk with that same person or group of people around you for about the next 30 seconds. What words, concepts, or ideas do we associate with the term civilization? If I drop that term civilization in conversation, what other words do you associate with it? Take 30 seconds, talk with some people about that. Some quick volunteers. I heard some good stuff here. What, just words? Give us some word salad here. Bananagrams. What do we associate with civilization? Yeah, go ahead. Development. The idea that things are developing, improving. Good, yeah. Cooperation. Yeah, going to live together as a group. We can't be at each other's throats constantly. Going to have to cooperate. We're the human species. We cooperate. Go for it. Yeah. Technology, yeah, it's a big part of it. Farming is going to unlock a lot of technology. Yeah, last one. Religion, good, you anticipated that. Religion is going to get formalized and increasingly part of the social fabric once civilization gets unlocked. You guys got many of them. Let's explore. I'm going to give you a list. What are some things, some outgrowths, byproducts of civilizations? What does it give us? What do we get out of it? The early people who adopted it, they could anticipate this is what we're getting. One thing it offers, probably the most obvious, it allows you to stay in one place. Don't have to follow the animal herds anymore. Don't have to travel, 100 miles to those faraway forests to gather, those roots and so forth that grow at that time of year. All that pressure is taken away. There's new pressure, but the pressure to move is taken away. You could set about making this piece of land your place. It's going to produce your food. It's going to graze your animals. It is going to be the land on which your family and children's children's children will be born. That's a powerful thing for humans to think about, our attachment to land and place. One of the first projects that humans are going to engage with the land is going to be the construction of what is called irrigation. Those of you who are from a farming background, you're probably very certain of this term. It basically just means the capturing and directing of water for crop production. And the first forms of this were basically getting dozens or hundreds of people together and digging ditches, shovels, pickaxes, the most rudimentary forms of them, and directing water from a riverbed half a mile, maybe more inland in increasingly complex ways. So you can grow food further and further away from a river. So irrigation is going to force people together. Somebody had mentioned cooperation earlier. That's a cooperation project, digging large irrigation ditches. It's also going to lead to specialization. This is an important term. It kind of comes out of economics in a big way, but also throughout history. It means focusing on one skilled task. When you're a hunter-gatherer, you have to be proficient in a variety of tasks, and you don't really deviate from that. When you are in a farming, agricultural society, one that is creating a civilization, you're going to need specialization. Let me give you some practical examples. Once you settle down and build towns and villages, some people are going to have to build houses. Maybe one of those people is going to be particularly proficient at building houses. They look at them and they say, wow, that is an amazing thatch roof. I really like how you stack the mud in that brick formation. It's really good. We should expand that to the rest of the group. That person maybe and their family or the people that work with them are going to be involved in home construction. That's a specialization. Maybe one person rises up when the village is attacked by an outside group, and they defend the village fiercely with valor and honor and courage, and the village is so thankful that they bestow the honor of being sort of the war chief for defending the village on that person. Now they specialize. They're part of this new warrior class, and they train up a generation of people to follow in their footsteps. Maybe another person is really good at public speaking, and they can communicate to the group and get people to rise up and do things that they previously thought they couldn't do. That person maybe takes the lead in the government, and they create the set of rules and regulations that people follow, and so on and so forth. Maybe others go into religious beliefs in the priest class and so forth. There is a need for protection from outsiders. It was mentioned that farming equals violence. That is true. And as a consequence, you need to be figuring out immediately how you can defend your land. Standing armies enforce social order. If people don't want to get up and dig that ditch, you have to have mechanisms for making them do that. That's a hard question. Our criminal justice system sorts out people every day who step out of line of some regulation or rule that we all agreed on, for the most part. What does civilization give us? Here are some others. Taxation. Taxation is done every time you make a transaction by way of a sales tax. Taxation is going to emerge as governments have to pay for stuff. We actually have to pay for that irrigation ditch. Those thatch roofs have to be paid for, and maybe the government has a hand in making it happen. Record keeping. Keeping track of when the harvest is. When is that wheat and barley harvest going to happen? Is it going to happen when the moon is like this, when the weather's like this? We should be ready. Maybe somebody should be ready with clay pots so we can keep them dry and it won't get destroyed in the wet months. Writing systems, currencies. We should have means of exchange so I don't just have to show up with my 4 pots of barley and exchange for 2 goats. Maybe we could have another medium of exchange. Maybe metal coins or so on, other representative value items. Political institutions, a fancy way of thinking about government. You get the arrival of things like war chiefs. I mentioned that person who expresses bravery and courage and valor. Maybe they become very powerful and they go out, not just defend the village, but they go out and take other people's stuff and conquer another village and another and another. And maybe they become so powerful, they're the leader in the society. And they want to pass on that power, control, and wealth to their children. And maybe they have a half dozen or a dozen children, and they want to make sure that their prosperity and power gets transmitted. So they have a ruling dynasty. Religious beliefs. People start grappling with bigger and bigger questions once civilization starts. It's not just, are we going to have enough food? It's going to be questions like, what happens in the afterlife? Is there an afterlife? Do we know the specifics? In order to get this in the afterlife, should we live a certain way? Should we behave in a certain manner? How should we behave around important passages in life, like birth, marriage, death? Are there ways that we behave? Are there ceremonies, things that we come together over? That's going to coalesce around religious beliefs. I want to pose this question, not for you to answer, but just as we move into the next part. Where do these first civilizations emerge? Is there a commonality to it? Are there trends that we can observe in the natural world? Yeah, there actually are. In fact, civilizations tend to emerge in 4 spots on the Earth's surface, at least first. They spread out from there. Here they are. I wanted you to be sensitive to the geography of it. The first one we're going to be looking at in this class is we're going to be looking at the Indus civilization. Ms. Roth's going to talk about that on Tuesday. That's right here. It's in modern-day India and Pakistan. It's going to have some amazing feats, but it's going to kind of die out where the others are going to kind of live on, or it's going to migrate a little bit. The oldest of all of these river valley civilizations is going to be here in a region known as Mesopotamia, in what would be the modern-day countries of Iraq, Kuwait, Syria, Jordan, and a little bit of Iran. This area is going to be the first spot on the Earth's surface, what you see in orange, to support a complex civilization. And it's going to quickly emerge almost simultaneously in places like North Africa and Egypt and the Nile River Delta, but also in the Indus and then eventually in China in the Huanghe and the Changjiang River Valley. It's going to support lots of people there, especially in China. Not only those two river valleys, but this area known as the North China Plain. It's going to allow for lots of food to be grown. It's going to support the biggest civilization throughout much of human history. So the common thing that each of these have together is that they're all based in river valleys. River valleys are going to be the building blocks, the incubators, the starter fuel to civilization. And I want you to think about why that is. It's something we're going to explore more here. But river valleys are going to be the location. Mesopotamia, Indus, Egypt, and China. Every unit that we get through in world history, we're going to probably start, at least ones that go back to there, we're going to start in those first civilizations that emerge. So here's where I want to end up. I want you to think about what people gave up when they decided to adopt civilization and leave hunting and gathering behind. There's a trade-off there. It doesn't happen all at once. It's somewhat gradualized. But I want you to think about it in terms of there's upsides and there's downsides. Like all great changes in history or in our lives, there's often upsides and downsides. I want to think about the downsides first because it's counterintuitive. We often associate that word civilization with positivity, development, technology, progress, prosperity. It's a positive ringing word in our language. But it also came with some serious downside. Let's look at some of them. One is increased social inequality. What? I thought we're producing more. There's more to go around. Yeah, that's true. There's more wheat and barley. There's now animals. But there's more stuff to fight about, too. It's not as though everybody gets an equal distribution of those early products of civilization. Some people are going to take a bigger cut. And they're going to maybe think that they rightly deserve a bigger cut. Maybe they're the war chief in the society that defended this land. Maybe they're the high priest who believes they have some sort of religious claim to it. Maybe they're the governmental leader. So there's a big divide between rich and poor once civilization emerges. Where hunter-gatherers, for all of their situation, they were fairly egalitarian, fairly equal, at least in their social arrangements. More violence. We mentioned that. It's one of those big truisms in human history. Human beings, violent amongst each other. Circles a lot around that issue of land ownership and passing it on to your offspring. New diseases. This might be surprising for some of you, but here's the big change. You're now living in bigger and bigger groups, more densely populated, and here's the big change. Animals are now living with you. You really have to live around those goats and sheep and pigs and chicken and cows and all the other livestock that comes around. Some of it, like horses and oxen, are going to be really important because they're going to allow you to move big stuff and get big things done. But new diseases, animal-borne pathogens, are going to just change the human body. Some humans are going to get immunity to this and pass it on to their offspring. Hereditary immunity, and then other groups of humans aren't going to have it. So, for instance, 500 years ago, when the Europeans arrive in the Caribbean and the Americas, the Native Americans don't have immunity to things like smallpox and influenza and other things that originally came out of animal-borne diseases. Upsides. Here's the stuff that probably is pretty visible to us, pretty intuitive. You get more food than you need. There's a surplus food. But again, that comes with a cost. You got to figure out how to divide up the surplus. Give people prosperity and bounty, and they will find ways to fight about it. Wider variety of goods. You now have metal tools to chop that wheat and barley. Better bricks that hold bigger structures. Better tools And here's the big thing. Accumulation of knowledge. Now that you have writing systems, you can build off of the advancements of previous people. You can really look at the plans to see how did they build those mud huts. Maybe we could build brick huts. Maybe we could carve stone in this formation and distribute weight throughout a structure and get increasingly complex. You build off of the advancements of other people. Hunter-gatherers, they're not doing that.